Hi, I'm Rashonda Kate. This is Reading with Rashonda. We are reading Running a Thousand Miles for Freedom by William and Ellen Craft. We are on Part 1, Video 11. Let's dive in. For the purpose of somewhat disguising myself, I bought and wore a very good second-hand white beaver, an article which I had never indulged in before. So just before we arrived at Washington, an uncouth planter who had been watching me very closely said to my master, "I reckon, stranger, you are spilin' that 'ere nigger of yourn by letting him wear such a devilish fine hat. Just look at the quality on it. The president couldn't wear better. I should just like to go and kick it overboard." His friend touched him and said, "Don't speak so to a gentleman." "Why not?" exclaimed the fellow. He grated his short teeth, which appeared to be nearly worn away by the incessant chewing of tobacco, and said, "It always makes me itch all over from head to toe to get hold of every damn nigger I see dressed like a white man. Washington is run away with spiled and free niggers. If I had my way, I would sell every damned rascal of 'em way down south where the devil would be whipped out of 'em." This man's fierce manner made my master feel rather nervous, and therefore he thought the less he said the better. So he walked off without making any reply. In a few minutes we were landed at Washington, where we took a conveyance and hurried off to the train for Baltimore. We left our cottage on Wednesday morning, the 21st of December, 1848, and arrived at Baltimore Saturday evening, the 24th, Christmas Eve. Baltimore was the last slave port of any note at which we stopped. On arriving there, we felt more anxious than ever, because we knew not what that last dark night would bring forth. It is true we were near the goal, but our poor hearts were still as if tossed at sea, and, as there was another great and dangerous bar to pass, we were afraid our liberties would be wrecked, and like the ill-fated royal charter, go down forever, just off the place we longed to reach. They are particularly watchful at Baltimore to prevent slaves from escaping into Pennsylvania, which is a free state. After I had seen my master into one of the best carriages and was just about to step into mine, an officer, a full-blooded Yankee of the lower order, saw me. He came quickly up, and tapping me on the shoulder, said in his unmistakable native twang, together with no little display of his authority, "Where are you going, boy?" "To Philadelphia, sir," I humbly replied. "Well, what are you going there for?" "I am traveling with my master, who is in the next carriage, sir." "Well, I calculate you had better get him out, and be mighty quick about it, because this train will soon be starting. It is against my rules to let any man take a slave past here unless he can satisfy them in the office that he has a right to take him along." The officer then passed on and left me standing upon the platform with my anxious heart apparently palpitating in the throat. At first, I scarcely knew which way to turn, but it soon occurred to me that the good God who had been with us thus far would not forsake us at the 11th hour. So with renewed hope, I stepped into my master's carriage to inform him of the difficulty. I found him sitting at the farther end, quite alone. As soon as he looked up and saw me, he smiled. I also tried to wear a cheerful countenance in order to break the shock of the sad news. I knew what made him smile. He was aware that if we were fortunate, we should reach our destination at 5 o'clock the next morning, and this made it the more painful to communicate what the officer had said. But as there was no time to lose, I went up to him and asked him how he felt. He said, "Much better," and that he thanked God we were getting on so nicely. I then said we were not getting on quite so well as we had anticipated. He anxiously and quickly asked what was the matter. I told him. He started as if struck by lightning and exclaimed, "Good heavens! William, is it possible that we are, after all, doomed to hopeless bondage?" Ah! I could say nothing. My heart was too full to speak, for at first I did not know what to do. However, we knew it would never do to turn back to the city of destruction like Bunyan's mistrust and timorous, because they saw lions in the narrow way after ascending the hill Difficulty, but press on, like noble, Christian, and hopeful, to the great city in which dwelt a few shining ones. Reference to Paul Bunyan. Isn't that Paul Bunyan? Was he the Axeman? No, the John Bunyan. John Bunyan, the that 19th century story, the allegory, John Bunyan. I read it a long time ago. I don't remember all of it. Sorry, I got distracted. All right. So, after a few moments, I did all I could to encourage my companion, and we stepped out and made for the office. But how or where my master obtained sufficient courage to face the tyrants who had power to blast all we had dear, heaven only knows. Queen Elizabeth could not have been more terror-stricken on being forced to land at the Traitor's Gate leading to the Tower than we were on entering that office. We felt that our very existence was at stake and that we must either sink or swim. But, as God was our present and mighty helper in this, as well as in all former trials, we were able to keep our heads up and press forwards. On entering the room, we found the principal man, to whom my master said, "Do you wish to see me, sir?" "Yes," said this eagle-eyed officer, and he added, "It is against our rules, sir, to allow any person to take a slave out of Baltimore into Philadelphia unless he can satisfy us that he has a right to take him along." "Why is that?" asked my master, with more firmness than could be expected. "Because, sir," continued he in a voice and manner that almost chilled our blood, "if we should suffer any gentleman to take a slave past here into Philadelphia, and should the gentleman with whom the slave might be traveling turn out not to be his rightful owner, and should the proper master come and prove that his slave escaped on our road, we shall have to pay for, and therefore we cannot let any slave pass here without receiving security to show and to satisfy us that it is all right." This conversation attracted the attention of the large number of bustling passengers. After the officer had finished, a few of them said, not because they thought we were slaves endeavoring to escape, but merely because they thought my master was a slaveholder and invalid gentleman, and therefore it was wrong to detain him. The officer, observing that the passengers sympathized with my master, asked him if he was not acquainted with some gentleman in Baltimore that he could get to endorse for him to show that I was his property, and that he had a right to take me off. He said no, and added, "I bought tickets in Charleston to pass us through to Philadelphia, and therefore you have no right to detain us here." "Yeah!" "Well, sir," said the man indignantly, "right or no right, we shan't let you go." These sharp words fell upon our anxious hearts like the crack of doom, and made us feel that only hope smiles to deceive. For a few moments, perfect silence prevailed. My master looked at me, and I at him, but neither of us dared to speak a word, for fear of making some blunder that would tend to our detection. We knew that the officers had power to throw us into prison, and if they had done so, we must have been detected and driven back like the vilest felons to a life of slavery, which we dreaded far more than sudden death. We felt as though we had come into deep waters and were about being overwhelmed, and that the slightest mistake would clip asunder the last brittle thread of hope by which we were suspended, and let us down forever into the dark and horrible pit of misery and degradation from which we were straining every nerve to escape. While our hearts were crying lustily unto him who is ever ready and able to save, the conductor of the train that we had just left stepped in. The officer asked if we came by the train with him from Washington. He said we did, and left the room. Just then the bell rang for the train to leave, and had it been the sudden shock of an earthquake, it could not have given us a greater thrill. The sound of the bell caused every eye to flash with apparent interest, and to be more steadily fixed upon us than before. But, as God would have it, the officer all at once thrust his fingers through his hair, and in a state of great agitation said, "I really don't know what to do. I calculate it is all right." He then told the clerk to run and tell the conductor to let this gentleman and slave pass, adding, "As he is not well, it is a pity to stop him here. We will let him go." My master thanked him and stepped out and hobbled across the platform as quickly as possible. I tumbled him unceremoniously into one of the best carriages and leaped into mine just as the train was gliding off towards our happy destination. We thought of this plan about 4 days before we left Macon, and as we had our daily employment to attend to, we only saw each other at night. So we sat up the 4 long nights talking over the plan and making preparations. We had also been 4 days on the journey, and as we traveled night and day, we got but very limited opportunities for sleeping. I believe nothing in the world could have kept us awake so long but the intense excitement produced by the fear of being retaken on the one hand and the bright anticipation of liberty on the other. We left Baltimore about 8 o'clock in the evening, and not being aware of a stopping place of any consequence between there and Philadelphia, and also knowing that if we were fortunate we should be in the latter place early the next morning, I thought I might indulge in a few minutes' sleep in the car. But I, like Bunyan's Christian in the Arbor, went to sleep at the wrong time and took too long a nap. Uh-oh. So, when the train reached Havre de Grace, all the first-class passengers had to get out of the carriages and into a ferry boat to be ferried across the Susquehanna River and take the train on the opposite side. The road was constructed so as to be raised or lowered to suit the tide. So they rolled the luggage vans onto the boat and off on the other side, and as I was in one of the apartments adjoining a baggage car, they considered it unnecessary to awaken me and tumbled me over with the luggage. He didn't wake up. Well, I guess you'd been on a moving train and if the whole car goes over, you just feel the rumble. It's not a big deal. All right. But when my master was asked to leave his seat, he found it very dark and cold and raining. He missed me for the first time on the journey. On all previous occasions, as soon as the train stopped, I was at hand to assist him. This caused many slaveholders to praise me very much. They said they had never before seen a slave so attentive to his master, and therefore my absence filled him with terror and confusion. The children of Israel could not have felt more troubled on arriving at the Red Sea. Wow, now that is quite a comparison. The terror and confusion Ellen felt without William there when they stopped, to how the children of Israel felt confronted with the Red Sea before them and Pharaoh's army behind them. That is a lot of terror and confusion to feel. So he asked the conductor if he had seen anything of his slave. The man, being somewhat of an abolitionist and believing that my master was really a slaveholder, thought he would tease him a little respecting me. So he said, "No, sir. I haven't seen anything of him for some time. I have no doubt he has run away and is in Philadelphia free long before now." My master knew that there was nothing in this, so he asked the conductor if he would please to see if he could find me. The man indignantly replied, "I am no slave hunter, and as far as I am concerned, everybody must look after their own niggers." He went off and left the confused invalid to fancy whatever he felt inclined. My master at first thought I must have been kidnapped into slavery by someone, or left or perhaps killed on the train. He also thought of stopping to see if he could hear anything of me, but he soon remembered that he had no money. That night all the money we had was consigned to my own pocket because we thought, in case there were any pickpockets about, a slave's pocket would be the last one they would look for. However, hoping to meet me some day in the land of liberty, and as he had the tickets, he thought it best upon the whole to enter the boat and come off to Philadelphia and endeavor to make his way alone in this cold and hollow world as best he could. So the time was now up, so we went on board and came across with feelings that can be better imagined than described. After the train had got fairly on the way to Philadelphia, the guard came to my car and gave me a violent shake and bawled out at the same time, "Boy, wake up!" I started, almost frightened out of my wits. He said, "Your master is half scared to death about you." That frightened me more still. I thought they had found him out, so I anxiously inquired what was the matter. The guard said, "He thinks you have run away from him." This made me feel quite at ease. I said, "No, sir, I am satisfied my good master doesn't think that." So off I started to see him. He had been fearfully nervous, but on seeing me he at once felt much better. He merely wished to know what had become of me. Okay, so this whole time Ellen is posed as a man, William is posed as her slave, but at this moment, can you imagine how difficult it must have been for them not to embrace, to not act as husband and wife. If I were terrified about my husband thinking he had been captured, when I saw him, I would run into his arms. But no, they couldn't do that. All right. That just really struck me. I think it's good to remember that, well, any story you read, if it's fiction or nonfiction, is talking about people, and people have emotions just like we do outside of the story, and they might behave similarly to us. But particularly in this, a true story, wow, what that must have felt like. Okay, I'll keep reading. My Kindle says I have 5 minutes left until we get to the next portion, so let's just press on and get there. On returning to my seat, I found the conductor and 2 or 3 other persons amusing themselves very much respecting my running away. So the guard said, "Boy, what did your master want?" I replied, he merely wished to know what had become of me. "No," said the man, "that was not it. He thought you had taken French leave for parts unknown. I never saw a fellow so badly scared about losing his slave in my life. Now," continued the guard, "let me give you a little friendly advice. When you get to Philadelphia, run away and leave that cripple and have your liberty." "No, sir," I indifferently replied. "I can't promise to do that." "Why not?" said the conductor, evidently much surprised. "Don't you want your liberty?" "Yes, sir," I replied, "but I shall never run away from such a good master as I have at present." I may state here that every man slave is called boy till he is very old. Then the more respectable slaveholders call him uncle. The women are all girls till they are aged, then they are called aunts. This is the reason why Mrs. Stowe calls her characters Uncle Tom, Aunt Chloe, Uncle Tiff, etc. One of the men said to the guard, "Let him alone. I guess he will open his eyes when he gets to Philadelphia and see things in another light." After giving me a good deal of information, which I afterwards found to be very useful, they left me alone. I also met with a colored gentleman on this train who recommended me to a boarding house that was kept by an abolitionist, where he thought I would be quite safe if I wished to run away from my master. I thanked him kindly, but of course did not let him know who we were. Late at night, or rather early in the morning, I heard a fearful whistling of the steam engine, so I opened the window and looked out and saw a large number of flickering lights in the distance, and heard a passenger in the next carriage, who also had his head out of the window, say to his companion, "Wake up, old horse, we are at Philadelphia." And I know I said we were going to keep going, but let me pause here. I am intrigued by the number of people who are like, "Yes, escape. Here's a boarding house. Here are the things you should do." Nice. Very nice. The sight of those lights and that announcement made me feel almost as happy as Bunyan's Christian must have felt when he first caught sight of the cross. I, like him, felt that the straps that bound the heavy burden to my back began to pop and the load to roll off. I also looked and looked again, for it appeared very wonderful to me how the mere sight of our first city of refuge should have all at once made my hitherto sad and heavy heart become so light and happy. As the train speeded on, I rejoiced and thanked God with all my heart and soul for his great kindness and tender mercy in watching over us and bringing us safely through. As soon as the train had reached the platform, before it had fairly stopped, I hurried out of my carriage to my master, whom I got at once into a cab, placed the luggage on, jumped in myself, and we drove off to the boarding house which was so kindly recommended to me. On leaving the station, my master, or rather my wife, as I may now say, who had from the commencement of the journey borne up in a manner that much surprised us both, grasped me by the hand and said, "Thank God, William, we are safe," and then burst into tears, leant upon me, and wept like a child. The reaction was fearful, so when we reached the house she was in reality so weak and faint that she could scarcely stand alone. However, I got her into the apartments that were pointed out, and there we knelt down on this Sabbath and Christmas day, a day that will ever be memorable to us, and poured out our heartfelt gratitude to God for his goodness in enabling us to overcome so many perilous difficulties in escaping out of the jaws of the wicked. And there ends part 1. 4 days, just 4 days, they went from slavery to freedom in an action-packed, thrilling account of escape. And that's where we are with Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom by William and Ellen Craft. This is Reading with Rashonda, and I'm Rashonda Cade.